Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Happy Groundhog's Day. We are celebrating February 2nd, 2022 to have Dr. McDaniel here to review Module 3, Building Your Tier 2 Intervention. Thank you to everyone who's been able to participate in the Schoology course. You've reviewed your 4 videos for this week. You've had the opportunity to review those supporting materials. And if you are moving forward with getting the certification or you are interested, some of you have been filling out the surveys and we appreciate that feedback. I am going to just review where to access the materials. Thank you so much, Tina. So on your Schoology course, don't forget when you click on Module 3 to open up our module for this time, I know that it's been a little while since we met. Don't forget, you're going to click on the Supporting Resources folder, and you're going to take a moment to open up each one of those interventions and download those resources so you can use them, potentially make adjustments, individualize those for your groups of students or individual students in the future. So again, welcome to all of you. And I'm going to now turn this over to Dr. McDaniel to kind of, again, answer some of those questions that were submitted and summarize this past module. So Dr. McDaniel.
Hello, everybody. Happy Groundhog's Day and tutu. We were just saying there's another, if you missed it today, there's another 222 coming up for you to celebrate as well. And so how fitting that we're focusing on Tier 2 today. So I know there were some this is a lot of information. So I did just want to kind of go backwards and go over what we talked about in Module 3, and then I'll go over each of these questions. There's some really great questions, and then I will kind of preview for you Module 4. We did try to warn you that the Module 3 was going to be quite lengthy, and that is the longest module because it has interventions for each category that we go over. Some are a little bit longer than others. And that's all really building your toolbox. So if you think about like visualizing what this would look like, if you have your dividers and your spacers all fit in your toolbox, and that's kind of the systems and the procedures we talked about in the first 2 modules, what Module 3 was about was filling in evidence-based interventions and strategies in each of the categories. So that was a lot of work. So we went over interventions under the conduct category. So different check-in, check-out kind of variations under that. We went under hyperactivity and attention. We talked about goal setting, self-monitoring, and self-graphing. We talked about peer problems and pro-social. Remember those collapsed down, and looked at problem-solving activity, behavior contracts, and social skills or social emotional learning programs in a kind of targeted small group redelivery. And then went over the emotional symptom category, which right now we're actually seeing high rates of students who are identified in the abnormal category or very elevated category for emotional symptoms. And we started a new procedure here this year that every single student that is demonstrating that elevated score in emotional symptoms, it's an automatic referral to counselor. And then the counselor is kind of then seen as the gatekeeper and gets to decide for that student. The counselor is going to have a one-on-one with the student, almost like an intake, and figure out, is it a social need, like living circumstances aren't good? Is it like more of a social work thing, refer to social work? Is it more of a mental health issue and we need to refer to mental health services? Is it something where we need to bring the family on, or is this something that we could do mindfulness or emotion regulation or talking about emotions and feelings, like something more that they can do at school? So I did want to mention that for the emotional symptom category, I think we emphasize over and over how important it is to address those needs. But given the place we're at right now, we're seeing a lot of those needs. So we are handing that over to our school counselors and we're kind of appointing them as the gatekeepers to decide for that student what they need. So first question is talking about if the SDQ is indicating that we need intensive levels of support, but at our school, we don't have the personnel required. So for instance, the check-in, check-out varieties, we talked about check, connect, and expect, which requires a full-time behavior interventionist. And a lot of schools don't have those. I don't even think that's a job here in Alabama. So if you don't have that personnel, the question is, what do you do? And my answer would be something is better than nothing. So I would do whatever you can do as intensively as you can. And that's better than doing nothing. And then that more wait to fail and end up in tier 3, because tier 3 again is very resource and personnel intensive. So we do want to kind of try to avoid overusing tier 3. So that would mean if all you can do is check in, check out, that's perfectly fine. But we've actually found that even for students with those really high scores in some of the categories, conduct and hyperactivity, something like check in, check out with a midday checkup some days, even if you can't make it happen every day, is actually pretty effective. So sometimes even when those scores are really high, some schools decide everyone's starting with the least intensive. And then we're going to quickly decide if that's not going well, we can add, we can change and intensify later. But a lot of schools are telling us we're so swamped, everyone's just going to start with those less intensive strategies first, and then we'll move. There's another one about the problem solving activity. So the antecedent behavior consequence graphic organizer, the ABCGO, remember that was the only reactive strategy that we used, super low intensive, really easy to use. It was actually really fun making that and trying to teach students in the studies that we did with it about their patterns of behavior. And it, the first one, you're not going to get to that impact. Like the first one, they're going to reflect and kind of think through what happened. But if you can save or have the assistant principal save copies of those, what we intend to do is kind of lay them out and say, okay, Joseph, it looks like last time you were in my office, it was also the morning and it was a Monday and somebody bumped into you that time. And so then we had some physical aggression. So, that one strategy, the more of them really puts that pattern together for kiddos, because as we all know, there's usually some sort of pattern. That all the behavior is not just totally haphazard. So we can help them identify that pattern and then say, hey, it's Monday morning. Let's meet Joseph in the hallway so that we can help him transition successfully to the classroom where nobody's kind of getting in his way or whatever. So the question was, would you have the student fill that out immediately or after the class period? So if you can imagine a very angry student and then asking them to do something while they're angry, that's not going to go very well at all. So yes, there is usually a lag in some calm down de-escalation time that has to occur between the infraction or the event, the incident, and then coming back and being able to reflect on that. What we don't want to do is add another power struggle. So you're in trouble and calling your mom and do this form. You're not doing the form. I told you to do the form. And now we're in a whole power struggle over doing the form, right? So we do want to use it as an instructional tool, which means we need the student to be in a place where they can calmly reflect on what happened and be in a place where they are mentally ready to learn something about that, right? Because it's not a punitive measure. I would say, especially for younger ones though, even if you wait to the end of the day, the 5-year-olds are not going to remember what in the world happened. So I would just kind of keep an eye on waiting too long, but definitely not while a child is escalated anyway or still upset. Somebody else asked about self-monitoring. So we say all the time that self-monitoring should be one period of the day. That's if it's the intensive, like every minute rate yourself or every 30 seconds rate yourself. If you wanted to do something like this person is asking for elementary, if you wanted to do during this class period, was I on task or off task? Just know that it's not going to be super nuanced. That data, the way they'll assess themselves is broad. So if that's okay with you, if that's going to get them thinking through and get them shifting that locus of control to be more internal, then that's fine. What we don't want them doing though, is that every 30 second, every minute, on task, off task, in seat, out of seat, that sort of thing. It'd be way too much to do that more than once a day. We have seen some really cute examples. It's kind of self-monitoring, I guess, where it's the smiley faces and then they rate themselves. I did great. I did kind of in the middle, kind of like that straight smile thing, and then frowny face. So for little ones, just know the longer you wait, if it's not real-time behavior that they're rating, the more they have to look back and think through during that academic period. There may be one thing that catches their attention when they actually did raise their hand. So they're going to say, I raised my hand the whole time, because they remember the one time they raised their hand and they got praised, right? So it might not be as effective or accurate, But if that's how you want to get it started or that works best, that'll be fun. Lots of resources. So you guys remember where and those are just examples. So if you take them as Word documents or PDFs, if you want to recreate it and put the district mascot or the school mascot or change the format, or you want to make it into tables instead of a Word, whatever you want to do, all of those are really just examples for you guys to take to make sense out of. The question was about parent permission and whether, this one is about pulling kids for services. So we're changing settings. So that is a little bit different. But if you back up from there, different districts here handle this differently. So some districts let all parents know that all kids are getting screened. And in that way, if their kid screens in, it's no surprise to them because they've already seen this notice, hopefully, if they read the email or whatever. We have other districts who don't say anything about screening because they consider it a normal educational practice, and they notify caregivers when their student screens in. And then there'll be a phone call or a meeting about, we think your child needs tier 2 around this area. This is what the data is showing us. Here's what we're going to try. Here's when you can expect to hear back from us again. We have other districts that will say, our data shows that your child has screened in. We want to confirm with you or get permission to do any intervention, or we want you to fill out this caregiver form and tell us more about what you're seeing. So some it's like, before the screening even takes place, some it's when they screen in, just letting you know we're doing this. And then some it's like, we're going to get permission before we even get started. So that's kind of the different ways. We haven't seen anybody keep it a total secret from any caregivers that they screened in and that they're getting this new intervention. So there probably does need to be at some level, at some time point, caregiver either notification or permission, which of course those two things are different. Notification, you're doing it anyway, you're just letting them know. And then permission, you're pausing everything you're doing until you get that caregiver on board and they say yes.
Again, in Pennsylvania, we want to make sure that you're going by whatever the district you're supporting feels the most comfortable with. And the passive consent for screening is okay. We do recommend when you're going into putting a student into tier 2 supports that you do a notification to the parent, that you share with the parent what the program is, and that you have parent support, because we also know that parent participation in these tier 2 supports is important as well. And so if you guys go back to our check-in, check-out modules that are on the PAPBS website in the password protected area, we have in there samples of permissions. So that would be a recommendation there. I just wanted to give a Pennsylvania spin to that.
Perfect. And there are we've seen some great examples. I could share them with you, Tina, of schools that say, not only do we want you to be a partner with us, but tell us more about your child. That tell us about their interests, their preferences. What's it like at home for them? What do they like to do? So there's even like, I actually wrote a chapter in the new check-in, check-out handbook that Leanne put out. And I wrote that chapter, the caregiver chapter. And we kind of explain the difference. Like it's either a one-way communication, like we're just telling you this is happening. And then the deeper way to do this would be to build a two-way so that we're actually exchanging information. We're exchanging data, we're exchanging preferences. And it's kind of this more circular thing. That would be the best kind of caregiver partnership you could have in this. All right. So then I guess to address this actual question, especially to pull kids. So, a lot of these interventions, you're not pulling kids at all, or strategies you're not pulling kids at all. I think the only ones that we talked about where you would pull kids out of their typical educational setting would be if you were doing like a small group pull out for counseling, individual counseling sessions, or small group social skills. So like reteaching what you're doing class-wide or something like that. So but do be careful, especially if you're pulling kids out of academics for right now, because of all the learning loss. We have to really balance out whether we actually think it's the most valuable thing to pull a child out of any academic related content to get to this. So I just wanted to highlight that kind of pull out part about tier 2. We actually probably should be using that very, very, very minimally. And actually, we have some really creative solutions from educators about doing social skills without pulling out. And they call them lunch bunch. and they grab students, they all go get their lunch at the cafeteria, and they get to go, and the teacher, the counselor, whoever it is, puts a Dollar Tree tablecloth on the back table, and they feel like it's all fancy, like the Olive Garden or something, and they have like lunch bunch social skills lessons. So you could do it that way. Next question is a great one about the CBT interventions, and really anything for under that counseling area is progress monitoring. And that one's a really tricky one, because what you're thinking of is you're going to have to progress monitor internalizing symptoms. So it's nothing that you could probably monitor tantrums that you can trace back to anxiousness or phobias or something like that. But you're still, if it's you monitoring it or recording something, it's going to be something that you see. So it's actually pretty difficult for the educator to be in charge of the progress monitoring for anything in that emotional symptom category. So what we've seen work really well, we built I could send you this Google form. It looks like a survey. Is that the form? Yeah. So where the teacher sends it to the student every day and they fill it out, and the questions are like, how am I feeling today? The last question is, I need somebody to talk to today. And definitely if I need somebody to talk to, somebody comes and finds that child today, but it's pretty much just a little wellness or well-being check-in. And then the student is filling that out on themselves. So you can use that as data. So if you have less days that are 5s and you have more 3s, you can kind of monitor the progress that way. But it would have to be something that the student is reflecting and evaluating themselves and their own emotions and thought on that category. So it does make it a little difficult. So hopefully that was helpful. And I can share that form. Check, connect, and expect. A question about examples, how that leveled system actually works. I did my dissertation on this intervention, and so I know it pretty well. And it would take a long time to explain. So I'll try to do just the short version. So check, connect, and expect has the basic level, the basic plus, and then the kind of step down level, and then graduates. So let me kind of explain. Everyone enters at the basic level. Basic is essentially just like check in, check out. You see the person in the morning, you get a goal sheet throughout the day, you see the person again in the afternoon. Basic plus level would mean we're not responding to that. So if you've already tried check in, check out, you might as well just start with basic plus. Basic plus on check, connect, and expect, they get the morning and the afternoon in the goal sheet, but also they get pulled out for relationship building, social skills, problem solving lessons, and that behavior coach comes into the classroom to observe, sit with the child, whatever. So kind of everyone enters in what's basically check in, check out. And then if they are still demonstrating a need, they get this basic plus level of check, connect, and expect. Because that person, that's their full-time job, they can pull students out for problem solving and social skills lessons and then push into the class. Then there's a step down level from basic, which is, I think they still see their mentor person in the morning and the afternoon, but the goal sheet goes away, or somehow it's like faded. It's check in, check out procedures essentially that are faded. And then the really cool thing about that, and you could build this in with any of your tier 2 strategies and interventions, but I loved it, is you're actually taking kids who are once identified as having this serious need or the serious risk, and they become graduates of the program. And so there's a whole, like when they move back to tier 1, they actually become graduates of check, connect, and expect, and they can become peer mentors, and they can come in and talk to the new group of students or whatever. So I thought that part was pretty cool. So that is essentially how check, connect, and expect works. They use, the stop and think social skills curriculum. I think that's the one they use for the pull out lessons, for problem solving and social skills both. And then the forms look a lot like check in, check out. It's just more intensive because that's that one person, that's their only job, is like those 12 kids that are on that level.
Pennsylvania clarification.
Yep.
So in Pennsylvania, we have a lot of folks who are on this call, IU, TAC, doing something called, make sure I say it right, check and connect. Check and
Okay, yeah,
connect.
that's a whole different one.
It's a whole different
Yeah.
program. It's out of the University of Minnesota. You have to go through a very program.
Right. And I can draw a distinction for you. That one would be great for secondary age students. and if the issue is around attendance and engagement. So check and connect is so if you think about it, check in, check out, check, connect, and expect. And it's called check and connect, right? Like that's the Minnesota version. Anyway, that one is great for, in my mind, like the way that I draw the distinction is secondary and includes a great attendance, which a lot of behavior problems are either co-occurring with attendance, or attendance and engagement is actually more of the issue. So, but it's really good for you guys to start thinking through where those things would fit. And what I've been thinking more lately is, you know, how we gave you that grid with the different categories and interventions. What I've been thinking through lately is, after you get all this content, is even just presenting the schools with a blank grid and say, okay, well now, you know, because that check and connect is not on that grid, but if you have check and connect, where would it fit? It would go right here. And why? Because it's more intensive than this. It requires more, and it fits with this category of need, you know. And if you have, I don't know, if you have some mindfulness curriculum that your counselor does or has available, okay, great. You know, so if you started almost with a blank grid, and then they fill in, first of all, what they already have, as long as it's evidence-based, and where it fits. And then you can backfill in of the strategies and interventions that I taught you, where the gaps are. So if you still have nothing more intensive for hyperactivity and attention, then you would know to fill in. But we've been thinking more and more about that kind of blank grid and then filling in. So, and it also differs whether you're in a secondary type of setting or elementary too. So I think the grids would look different. So module 4, we step away from intervention training. And for anyone who loves data, module 4 is going to be your jam, all about database decision-making to guide intervention, initial planning, and then what we do monthly when we're coming back and looking at that student case, making intervention change decisions. So the first thing that we'll talk about is making individualized goals for that student. And we'll talk about, the whole goal is to get back to tier 1. So what we have to keep oriented for ourselves at tier 2 is, what is typical tier 1 third grade behavior look like in our building? Tier 1, moving back to tier 1 never should require perfection or some weird standard 80% across 10 days. You know, 80%, what does that even mean? What is it at your school? What is tier 1? What is the range for tier 1 at your school? So that's our mastery criteria that we're going to use as our guidepost to get back to tier 1. And then we're going to plan backwards from there, based on wherever we are, how we can kind of set up incremental goals for the student and what we expect. So then we will talk about, after we place the student on intervention, we're not just going to leave them there until high school, till they enter the university with a check in, check out card for me to sign. So we obviously have to come back and figure out how it's going. So we'll get into all of the issues around progress monitoring. You know, you'll have to figure out things locally, like who's bringing the data, or who's graphing the data. Are we not graphing the data? Do the data, is there a data person on the tier 2 team, and that person's going to clean the data and make it real pretty in a PowerPoint? We have some schools that do that. But pretty much the requirement is, every month you're going to talk about that student's progress, but you need some data to go on. And we'll have to keep reminding everyone about that, because to make database decisions, we can't go like, well, he hasn't been as mad lately, and he's really been able to turn in his homework more often. We were like, where's the data? How does that correspond to what we're working on, and where are the data that support that? So there'll be a lot of conversation around that. And then we'll start talking about get the intervention started. And now, once you have those data, you have about 3 options. You're either going to keep everything exactly the way it is, or you're going to intensify and change because it's not going well, or you're going to fade and like plan for maintenance and generalization, those sorts of things, because it is going well. So the team has to kind of decide, are we sticking with what we got for another month? We're going to change because it's not going well, or are we going to change because it is going well? So you'll have lots of information there about fading and intensifying, thinking about generalization. It's not just good enough to use your new social skill of conflict resolution during group. To get back to tier 1, we need to know that you can use your new social skill of conflict resolution on the bus and at PE and in language arts and in math and in the hallway. So we talk about generalization and needing to plan for that before we move. And then maintenance. So the reason why we fade little bit by little bit is because we want to make sure that those skills are robust enough that we can actually remove our supports and that they will maintain. So you'll hear more about that. And then, these meetings, what we call them progress updates, they happen once a month. You may change something because you think it's going well. And the very next month, you're like, got to go back to plan A. That wasn't going well. And all of that is okay. I think it's important in module 4, and this could be different. So Tina, I'll have to ask you to remember the way we train is there is no standard cut point. So we don't say everyone only gets tier 2, you get to try 2 interventions. You've got 6 weeks to respond. And if you don't respond in 6 weeks, you're moving on to tier 3. So we train on this very flexible, if it's going well, let's stay with it. If it's not going well, let's change it, but still consider it tier 2. If it's going well, let's really slowly take that away. And we have some places that want us to tell them, 12 weeks, 8 weeks, 6 weeks, and then we're just moving on and making a different decision because of this random criteria. And so we don't have that. And I don't know if your state department thinks about targeted supports differently than that, and timelines and that sort of thing. But the way you'll hear me talking about it is those decisions are different for every child at tier 2. Some students just not getting any worse is actually progress. So think about that. Like if we're crashing and things are going very badly and all we do is level out, that means something is working. But for some kids, we don't want to just keep it the same. We want to make things better. So it just changes with every child, with all the circumstances and all the different ways in which they can respond to intervention. So Tina, do you have a different Pennsylvania take on that, those kind of standard protocol rules?
No, we don't. I mean, what you're saying is right where we are, how the student is responding. And, we don't say that they're a tier 2 kid. So, at this point, they're getting tier 2 supports. And now we're saying that they don't need tier 2 support. So we don't run into that problem at least that I know of.
Good. We've seen like districts make up these MTSS handbooks, and they have these rules in there where somebody can only receive tier 2 intervention for 6 weeks. And we're like, but what if it's going really well? We just need a few extra weeks. And it's like this very hard deadline. It can be very, you can imagine how that wouldn't go well. I
was gonna say, I think that to me seems like an over application and over rigidity with data decision rules, like which we do encourage, to have some kind of guidelines and some kind of periodic review and some kind of criteria, but like, again, just being kind of too rigid with that and maybe over applying that.
Yep. Good point. And we'll talk about decision rules and setting those in advance and having that as a guidepost for the team. But of course, there's still flexibility for all. I mean, a global pandemic could happen for all we know.
I have one question around that, the same idea. I know my background is primarily in reading, and we, like you said, we do not put parameters on that in the reading world, but we do like to figure out rate of improvement and calculate that and what's attainable and what would be, exceeding a rate of improvement. And I don't know if that, module 4 does something similar.
Well, you would have to think about, so there's some of the interventions do have data that are that sensitive that you can calculate those things for. So I'm thinking of self-monitoring and check-in, check-out, just as 2 really good examples. So if you have a daily data point and you establish your baseline average, then what you can do, what we would expect, what we usually say is we want to be growing somewhere around from your baseline average, which would be 35% of points earned, which is not good, but that's where we are. So our next goal would be 10% up from that. So we would give it a week or 2, depending on the student, on the rate, how quickly we think they can get 10% higher. Then once we reach a new baseline average of 45%, now we're going to bump it up to 55%. Like those, we do incremental, and we consider rate when we have those sensitive data available. So that's a great point. Some of them, though, they don't have data that is that sensitive. So if you're talking about like the goal setting activity, met my goal or did not meet my goal is a data point that you could consider progress. You would hope they would meet their goal more often, but it's not the kind like a yes, no dichotomous variable like that is not really the type of data that you can say. I mean, you could say, okay, we want at least 50% yeses this week. It's just not going to be as sensitive. So those will be kind of case by case, but we do want to consider rate. We just don't have something like oral reading fluency or, like the way you guys have like really sensitive data to consider like that. I wish we did. There are also like the DBR, the direct behavior rating, which is a great progress monitoring tool for any students who need tier 2 that don't already have progress monitoring included on the intervention. But I'm trying to think of how you would kind of do that there too. I mean, it's a rating scale. So you could consider where you want them to be eventually, and then work backwards on where they are. You always want to start where they are, and then kind of build from there in that same like incremental improvement. One thing I wanted to mention, and Tina, this may be different with Pennsylvania too, but I do just want to put it out there because nobody has asked yet. But in case you're thinking, when do we start to consider function? That question usually comes up because typically in tier 3 is where we're thinking of FBAs and intensive individualized behavior intervention plans that consider function, that are all based around antecedent replacement behavior consequence, that are addressing function. So in our just basic 3-tier way of thinking through this, the full FBA and designing those BIPs would fit in tier 3. However, for some students in tier 2, we can start to think about function. So if you know the facts and you have, I mean, a lot of function is, to be honest, not rocket science. It's usually not completely surprising when you figure out a student is peer maintained attention or whatever, but the facts would actually give you kind of a less formal, quicker way of determining not a really strong hypothesis statement around function, but a general idea of what function is contributing to the behavior. So if you can do something really informal like the facts and figure out in general, it's got to be attention, it's not escape, and out of the attention options, it's definitely adult attention or peer attention, then you can start making adaptations. When adaptations will come up in module 4, you can start making function-based adaptations. So if a student has peer maintained attention as why they continue to choose that behavior, then maybe for check-in, check-out, their reward that they get for meeting their goal is time with a peer, or maybe even switch the entire intervention to be peer mediated. So you can make these small adaptations to tier 2 interventions that still consider function and other things like preferences and culture and interests and things they absolutely don't like some 7th grade female student may not want anything to do with a male group or a male mentor. So you can know all these things about students and make little adaptations to make the interventions work better, either at the onset before you deliver, and then when it's not going well, you say, oh, it must be because he really likes technology. If we don't put it on that iPad, he's not going to fill it out. Okay, let's switch it to a Google form or whatever. But function is one of those things that usually comes up about now, where people are starting to see, okay, sometimes we get kind of intensive in tier 2. We're still not calling it tier 3. So when do we start to assess for or consider function? So that's generally what we don't ask that all students receiving tier 2 have a function survey at all, but it's more for when we start non-responding, like, okay, it might be time to kind of think about that peer attention or adult attention or escape-based behavior. There's actually quite a bit of thing in the field about this whole thing, because our BCBA friends are very, very, very function oriented, so it's kind of hard to get flexible sometimes on that. So you put it in the chat, Tina.
You talk about the check-in, check-out, and like the idea that the function-based, that's really good for kids who are seeking attention, but then how can you kind of massage check-in, check-out to look at escape-driven behavior, escape-based behavior? So we do have some of that in some of the resources that we've provided in the past. So, you know, again, what we're doing here is just adding more tools and more thoughts to what we do as a state. Doesn't mean that this is the end of, like, all those other things that we do are out. It's just that this is you guys have been looking for a more guidance about how do we provide more than just check in, check out, and how do we start building on these. And you know, I just think the lens that Sarah's bringing to the conversation is very widening our view of what tier 2 looks like. I know you all go on to papbs.org in the password protected area, okay? And you go under our school-wide PBIS curriculum. You're used to going into universal tier 1 and secondary tier 1 resources, right? And we just had the whole launch of that. If you go into advanced tiers, have linked to the Midwest curriculum, our intervention grids are there. So I was even thinking, like, some of these things that we've been talking about, Sarah, a project for our team as we move forward is to put these things in intervention grids, because we do that a lot, the Kathleen Lane look of grids. But I also wanted to point out that there's a lot in here around the systems part of tier 2. And we do have in here the facts that Sarah was talking about. Get into the behavior education plan, which is another term for check in, check out. We have the whole presentation on, like, how you present this to your school in there as well to enhance what Sarah has already provided. So these are things that we've shared in the past.
And that is all I have in previewed module 4. You'll find it to go way faster. So if you felt a little overwhelmed by the last one, that's okay. Because we're back to kind of those briefer videos and content. So
make sure that everyone gets access to all of the resources that have just been highlighted here from Dr. McDaniel, as well as through our PAPBS network website. We'll also share the direct link then to the advanced tiers, and specifically the tier 2 section of the website. I just quickly want to review a few housekeeping reminders for everyone that was able to join today. Remember that if you are interested in becoming credentialed or having a badge for the advanced tiers, we want to just remind you that we're keeping track of attendance for the synchronous sessions that we're having here with Dr. McDaniel. And we also are encouraging you to work through all of the modules, complete the assignments and the assessment at the end of each module, as well as I believe, did I miss anything else? I think that's it. I thought I was reading one more thing that needed to be done, but I think the Google survey is actually the assessment. So as long as you are able to attend 3 out of 5 of these sessions or follow up with the recordings if you were unable to be here live, working through each one of the modules and then completing the assessment, that will provide us the data we need to give you the credential of being knowledgeable at tier 2. So thank you all for joining today. Remember to register for module 4 Zoom. So you can do that on the Schoology course that's located in the top right-hand corner, I believe. And those materials are now available. So if anyone is eager to get started today, you can tackle module 4 on database decision making. And we look forward to seeing Dr. McDaniel very soon. I believe the next session, March 9th, forgive me. So March 9th, we will see Dr. McDaniel again. So thank you all for being here. Dr. McDaniel, thank you so much for answering